True crime cases often begin in the most ordinary places. A quiet neighborhood, a normal workday, a life that appears to be just beginning. In May of 1990, a young nurse named Marilyn Mitchell moved into a townhouse in Dothan. She had just graduated from nursing school and was excited about her future. Friends described her as compassionate, hardworking, and full of optimism. But only days after moving into her new home, that future would come to a sudden and tragic end. Her death would shock the community, launch a years-long investigation, and eventually lead to the conviction of Artis Hammonds. This is the story of the crime, the investigation, the DNA breakthrough, and the decades of legal battles that followed. Part 1: A New Beginning. In the spring of 1990, Marilyn Mitchell was beginning a new chapter in life. After completing her nursing education, she moved to Dothan, Alabama, where she planned to work and start building her career. Those who knew her described her as responsible, determined, and deeply caring toward patients and family members alike. She had recently purchased furniture and was in the process of settling into her new townhouse. Her fiancé was preparing for their future together. For most young couples, the first home is filled with excitement and anticipation. But something unimaginable would soon interrupt that new beginning. Part 2: The Discovery. On May 15, 1990, Marilyn's fiancé went to check on her at the townhouse. Something immediately felt wrong. The home appeared quiet. Inside, he discovered a scene that would leave the community stunned. Marilyn had been violently attacked inside the home. Police quickly arrived and secured the scene. Investigators soon realized that the crime was extremely brutal. Evidence suggested there had been a violent struggle inside the bedroom. The murder deeply affected the community of Dothan. For a town not accustomed to violent crime, the case became the center of intense concern. Who had done this, and why? Part 3: Early Investigation. Detectives from the local police department began working the case immediately. They interviewed neighbors. They searched for witnesses. They collected physical evidence from inside the townhouse. Investigators learned something important early in the investigation. Just one day before the crime, furniture had been delivered to the home. 2 delivery workers had been inside the townhouse assembling bedroom furniture. One of those workers was Artis Hammonds. At the time, however, investigators had very little evidence directly linking anyone to the crime. And despite their efforts, the case began to stall. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The murder of Marilyn Mitchell slowly became what investigators call a cold case. Part 4: The Case Goes Cold. Cold cases can be some of the most frustrating investigations for law enforcement. Evidence exists, but the pieces simply don't fit together. In the early 1990s, forensic science was still evolving. DNA testing existed, but it was not nearly as advanced or widely used as it would later become. The evidence from the crime scene remained stored, waiting for future testing methods that might unlock answers. Meanwhile, the family of Marilyn Mitchell continued to wait for justice. For 6 years, the case remained unresolved. But in the mid-1990s, a new technology would change everything. Part 5: DNA technology changes the case. During the 1990s, law enforcement agencies across the United States began building DNA databases. These databases allowed investigators to compare biological evidence from crime scenes with DNA samples collected from individuals in the criminal justice system. In 1996, authorities collected a DNA sample from Artis Hammonds, who was incarcerated at the time for an unrelated offense. When forensic scientists compared the sample with evidence collected from the Mitchell crime scene, they reported a match. For investigators, this discovery was a major breakthrough. It was the first strong forensic link between a suspect and the crime. Detectives also reviewed other evidence connected to the case, including fingerprints and witness testimony. With the DNA match in hand, authorities moved forward with an arrest. Part 6: The Arrest. In September 1996, police arrested Artis Hammonds in connection with the murder of Marilyn Mitchell. The arrest came 6 years after the crime. For the victim's family, it was the first sign that justice might finally be possible. Prosecutors prepared to take the case to court. The trial would soon become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the region. Part 7. The trial. During the trial, prosecutors presented several pieces of evidence to the jury. The most significant was DNA evidence linking Hammonds to biological material found at the crime scene. Prosecutors also presented testimony about the furniture delivery that had occurred shortly before the crime. The prosecution argued that the evidence pointed clearly to Hammonds as the perpetrator. Defense attorneys challenged the evidence and attempted to raise questions about the investigation. After hearing the testimony and reviewing the forensic evidence, the jury deliberated. They ultimately returned a verdict of guilty of capital murder. Because the case involved murder during another violent crime, the jury recommended the death penalty. The judge accepted that recommendation. Part 8. Appeals and legal battles. Like most death penalty cases in the United States, the conviction triggered a long series of appeals. Defense attorneys raised several legal arguments during those appeals. One of the issues involved comments made by the prosecution during the trial. The defense argued that those comments improperly referenced the defendant's right not to testify. Higher courts reviewed the case multiple times. While some courts acknowledged concerns about the comments, they ultimately ruled that the conviction should stand. As a result, the death sentence remained in place. Part 9. Where the case stands today. Decades after the crime, the case continues to be part of discussions about the death penalty and the justice system. Artis Hammonds remains on death row in Alabama. Legal proceedings and appeals have continued over the years, as is common in capital punishment cases. Meanwhile, the memory of Marilyn Mitchell remains important to those who knew her. For her family and friends, the tragedy left a permanent mark. True crime stories often focus on investigations in courtrooms. But at the center of every case is a real person whose life was lost. And for those left behind, the search for justice never truly ends. Published, March 19, 2026 at 6:06 p.m. Central Daylight Saving Time. Dothan, Allah. WTVY, Artis Hammonds, who is on death row for the murder of a Dothan nurse 36 years ago, is seeking a new trial and is acting as his own attorney. He claims systematic profiling and constitutional failures, among other things, in his Rule 32 petition. His motion was docketed on Thursday. A jury convicted Hammonds in 1997 of viciously murdering and sexually assaulting Marilyn Mitchell, a 22-year-old who had been stabbed repeatedly at a Dothan townhouse she had moved into only a couple of days earlier. After her death in 1990, the case went cold, and it would be several years before a forensic expert put Dothan police on Hammonds' trail. That expert's findings are called into question in Hammonds' latest attempt to overturn his conviction. He also makes several other claims, including that prosecutors and police failed to establish a legal chain of custody for evidence. This isn't the first time Hammonds, now 55, has tried to get his conviction overturned, but each time he lost those bids. A federal appeals court considered siding with Hammonds in 2017 but ultimately rejected his appeal to the 11th Circuit, though calling into question courtroom statements made by then Houston County District Attorney Doug Velasca as jurors listened. It was not immediately clear whether Hammonds' latest Rule 32 filing will delay his execution, for which a date has not been set. He was among Alabama death row inmates who chose nitrogen hypoxia as their preferred method of death. Let me end this video by saying rest in peace to the victim of this crime, Marilyn Mitchell, and I would like to send my condolences to the families affected by this tragedy. It was an awful thing that happened and I know she's pretty missed. And as for Artis Hammonds, to some known as Koran, man, to be sitting in the county jail for as long as you were while being on lockdown for most of it, by itself is tough. Sitting in there fighting for your life and just to keep having to wait for something, anything in your favor to happen is nothing compared to being stabbed up in your own house. You know what they say, what goes around comes around, and it looks like it's your turn. When the court isn't in your favor, it's nothing you can do about it. I don't wish any harm on anyone and it's not my place to judge. If you like the video, please hit the thumbs up and please subscribe. This KD.TV and I'm out.